Hi folks, how you doing? It's James JT at the movies and we're back for episode 21. 21, can you believe it, of Debriefing 007. We're going to take a look at 2006's Casino Royale, and I'm really proud that I've got this far into this series. And thank you so much to everybody that's been watching since I've started this, probably coming up on 18 months ago now, with the rankings and the Doctor No review. I really do appreciate everyone who's supported this particular series from its inception, if you like. This film is one of my favourites of the franchise, so let's waste no more time and dive in to Casino Royale. As I talked about with my last debriefing episode, 2002's Die Another Day, that film was released to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the film series of James Bond, and the producers and the copyright owners really went to town on celebrating James Bond. But the film, when it came out, received mixed reviews at best, actually leaning probably more towards negative, and it's certainly not a film that's aged well either with the Bond community. But at the time, Michael G. Wilson and Barbara Broccoli knew that they had to take a step back. They had to go back to Fleming, and they had to bring Bond back to its roots if the next film was going to be successful. They'd gone too far, much like they'd done with Moonraker before, or A View to a Kill, or even Diamonds Are Forever. They knew that they'd gone too far into the silliness and the outlandishness, and they needed to bring it back down to earth again. That was also perfectly timed with an ongoing legal battle that had been going on for nearly 50 years at that point, where Ian Fleming, way back in the 1950s, in his desperation to get James Bond adapted to be a star of the silver screen, sold the rights to Casino Royale to an American television company, which resulted in the 1954 TV movie Casino Royale, which was filmed completely live, and besides keeping the overarching plot of the novel, it was completely butchered. They made James Bond an American, and they made Felix Leiter English. They combined Mathis and Vesper into a character together, and completely butchered that character's arc. In fact, the only redeeming thing about that TV adaptation, if you can even go so far as to say that, is that they got Peter Lorre to play Le Chiffre. But anyway, Fleming sold the rights, and that atrocity was made on the back of that. But it then meant that when Broccoli and Saltzman came to make the Eon-produced films, the official films, as it were, that they couldn't make Casino Royale. And after their upset with Kevin McClory when they made Thunderball and the whole legal controversy that brought about, when they were actually approached by the copyright owners of Casino Royale to make a proper James Bond film in canon with Sean Connery at the time, the producers couldn't bear the thought of making a film with another co-producer and having to, entertain somebody else's demands because they were the rights holders. So they figured that Bond was big enough on its own to not need Casino Royale at that point. And declined. So that's how we ended up with the spoof Casino Royale that came out in 1967. And then over the years, nobody really did anything with those rights, and if anybody ever tried, or if McClory wanted to do something or combine them with his Thunderball rights or whatever, lawsuits were, quickly launched, and things were shot down before they even got off the ground, sort of thing. Then in the late 90s and early 2000s, there was actually a trade of some intellectual property rights, and one film studio had those old rights to Casino Royale that Fleming had sold many years ago, and then the other studio had the rights to Marvel's Spider-Man character, which had been basically stuck in development hell for years, and James Cameron was going to make a Spider-Man film, and then somebody else was going to, and there's a whole other video I could probably do just on that period of Sony Pictures alone. But they basically swapped rights, and so Casino Royale was suddenly back where it belonged with all the other Eon Productions Bond films, and they finally had the rights to make Casino Royale. Now, it was a little bit bittersweet for Michael Wilson and Barbara Broccoli, because Cubby, in his later years, had always lamented that he actually then wanted to make Casino Royale, but the opportunity never arose for him to do that because the rights weren't available, and the current rights holders at the time had no interest in making the film. So they decided that Casino Royale was going to be the film that they wanted to make. Initially, Pierce Brosnan was looking to come back, and they were looking at many different directors. Quentin Tarantino was even mused for a while, though the producers have said that it didn't get as far as them and that they wouldn't have entertained Quentin Tarantino's idea of a Bond film, which would have disregarded the continuity of the series so far and taken Brosnan as an aged Bond back to the 60s. and done the story rather than Bond sort of his coming of age story, if you like, and his sort of learning his craft story. It would have been like his swan song sort of thing. The film would have been shot in black and white, and if you're a Tarantino fan, you can only imagine how glorious that might have been, but completely surreal as well. I'm actually really glad that we didn't get that film. In late 2004, Pierce Brosnan decided it was time to step down, having reached an amicable agreement with the producers, and the hunt was on for a new Bond. They screen tested so many people, including Henry Cavill, who would go on to play Superman, Ewan McGregor, who played Obi-Wan Kenobi, but after screen testing several men, the producers in late 2005 finally settled on Daniel Craig. In true Bond style, the producers then held a press conference to introduce the world to the new James Bond, and people were in uproar. They were, well, he's not tall enough to be James Bond. He's not handsome enough to be James Bond. His hair's blonde. The critics and the papers were horrible to Daniel Craig before they'd even given him a chance. Well, of course, he soon showed them, because the film was absolutely fantastic and is regarded, I think, by most Bond fans as one of the best. So the producers, when they said that they wanted to make this film, they wanted to make it as near to the Fleming novel as they possibly could, of course updated to fit in modern times, and that the film would also serve as a soft reboot of the franchise, with Bond again at the start of his career, so it would disregard the previous 20 entries in terms of continuity. So this James Bond hasn't met up against Goldfinger or Hugo Drax or Max Zorin or whoever else Bond's gone up against in his time, and this is him getting his 00 licence and then going on his first assignment as a 00 agent. And I really like that they've taken that approach, because Die Another Day had got too silly, and it just wouldn't have worked to just carry on as though that hadn't happened with a new actor. So I'm really glad that they decided, do you know what, clean sweep, we're going to start again here. Let's take a look now at the plot of the film. So at the start of the film, it doesn't open like a traditional James Bond film. The previous 20 entries had all opened with the famous black and white dots going across the screen. James Bond walks on and shoots down the camera, blood trickles down the scene. The famous gun barrel sequence that I'm sure all Bond fans are familiar with, and even casual viewers will be familiar with the iconography of it. But this film doesn't open with that. It starts with a black and white scene. We see a man arriving at an office building, and the title tells us that we're in Prague. This is actually one of the section chiefs of MI6, and in his office Bond then confronts him, and the two have rather a sort of a relaxed but serious conversation about the fact that Dryden, the section chief, has been selling government secrets. Dryden doesn't believe that the British government actually suspect his wrongdoings, as to quote him, he says, "If they were so sure I was bent, they'd have sent a 00." But this is actually Bond being sent on his mission to gain his 00 status. To gain a 00 status in this continuity, you need 2 kills on your file. Bond then recounts with Dryden the killing of Dryden's contact Fisher and how that was his first kill. And the fight scene is perfectly intercut between the back and forth between these two characters, all in black and white. And the scene culminates with Bond shooting Dryden. And we finally get the sort of the backstory, if you like, behind what the gun barrel's meant to be. As Bond turns round in a bathroom stall that he's just had the fight with, believing that Fisher is now dead, to pick up his gun and retrieve his weapon, but Fisher, in a last breath, picks his gun up and goes to shoot. Bond, of course, has the upper hand, spins and shoots Fisher. The gun barrel then comes in and the title sequence starts. And we get the fantastic rock song, You Know My Name, sang and written by Chris Cornell, and also co-written by David Arnold, who again returns to do the music. As I mentioned in my last debriefing, this is one of the 2007 movies, and again, please let me know in the comments if I'm wrong and there's more, where the overarching story of the film is continued, if only slightly, in the pre-title sequence. The title cuts away as Bond is shooting through playing cards in there, and it dissolves into an email with M confirming that James Bond has now been given the code name of 007. It's a really great title sequence, and I really love that Daniel Kleinman, the title designer, had taken inspiration from the original cover of the first edition of Fleming's novel to sort of set the tones and the colour palette, if you like, and the patterns that were going to be used. And one other thing that sort of steps away from the series norm is that there's no dancing girls in this title sequence, as we've seen in the previous 20 entries. It's just James Bond wandering around the title sequence, basically earning his 00 status. And I just think it's a really good twist on the classic title sequences that we've seen come before. Out of the title sequence, the film then takes us to Uganda, where we're introduced to Mr. White, who's a really mysterious sort of character and quite obviously a villain involved in the piece, but we don't quite know where he fits in just yet. Mr. White introduces Mr. Urbano, a terrorist, to a private banker for terrorists. This film's main villain, Lashif, played by Mads Mikkelsen. Now, he is fantastic in this role, is Mads Mikkelsen, as is Jesper Christensen as Mr. White as well. Mr. Urbano entrusts Lashif with millions of his dollars. Lashif then takes that money and buys put-out options for Skyfleet Airlines, betting against the company's success, as he knows that there's going to be an upcoming terrorist attack organised by his organisation, which we don't know yet, but is later in subsequent films revealed to be Spectre. The film then takes us over to Madagascar, where we meet Bond on his first assignment after becoming a 00 agent, where under orders of M, he's pursuing a bomb maker, Mollica. Bond and the other agent pursue Mollica to a snake fight. The other agent unfortunately gives them away, prompting Mollica to flee. And we then get an absolutely superb chase scene, one of the best action set pieces, not just in Bond, but in action cinema, and definitely of the last 20 years, where Bond chases Mollica through the streets of Madagascar and ultimately to a building site. The actor playing Mollica in real life is a free runner and a parkour expert. And so, leaning into his skills, they have a fantastic chase around the building site, with Mollica diving from, building to building and girder to girder and jumping off cranes and sort of, shimmying down sort of lift shafts and jumping through really, really small holes and just doing some absolutely superb stunt work. And then we see Bond ably giving chase, but nowhere near as sort of efficiently, if you like. And Bond's making a complete mess of it, but still managing to keep up. The chase then culminates at an embassy where Bond has pursued Mollica to. Bond shoots up the embassy and several guards, ultimately blowing the embassy up by shooting a gas canister, but not before taking Mollica's bag and then shooting him first. Once he's returned to London, Bond is scolded by M, who is absolutely horrified with the arrogance and the actions that he's taken. She gives him a lecture and warns that he really needs to take his ego out of the equation if he's going to be a successful agent, and tells him to go and basically stick his head somewhere while she decides what to do with him, which seems to be a common thing that M says to Bond over the years, doesn't it really? After finding clues in Mollica's phone, Bond then heads to the Bahamas, where he's on the trail of Alex Demetrius, who is another player involved in this overall terrorist plot. Bond's still not too sure what's going on at this moment in time, but decides that he needs to try and insert himself into Demetrius's life to find out what's going. There's a really infamous scene in this film where Daniel Craig is sort of surveilling Demetrius from the beach, and we get the first look at Solange, who is Demetrius's wife. And in an accidental turn of events, where Daniel Craig was swimming in the sea and then decided to get out of the sea to, at the end of the take or whatever, the scene ended up resembling that of Ursula Andress coming out of the ocean, and the director Martin Campbell liked it so much that he chose to keep it in. Bond then inserts himself into Demetrius's evening by joining him for a game of poker at the hotel casino. Demetrius loses several $1,000s to Bond, and also the keys to his Aston Martin DB5, obviously the classic Bond car as well. Demetrius leaves, unbeknownst to Bond, to go and instigate the terrorist attack, but Bond seduces Solange, Demetrius's wife, to try and find out further information. And when Bond realises that Demetrius is out of town, he soon leaves Solange and heads off to Miami Airport, where he knows that Demetrius is going to be. In another really tense scene, and we've had quite a few of these to say that we're still only in the first act of the film, this film is really giving it to us, and I absolutely love it. But in this other tense scene, Bond manages to thwart the terrorist attack at Miami Airport, saving the Skyfleet liner, and obviously God knows how many hundreds of people from the explosion. In fact, only the terrorist ends up exploding when the detonator is placed by Bond through his belt loop. This ultimately causes Lashif to lose well over £100 million of Urbano and several other terrorists' money. So, realising that he needs to recoup his money and fast, Lashif organises the high-stakes poker game at Casino Royale in Montenegro. M decides that she's going to enter Bond into the game, as he's one of the best players in the service, and her belief is that if Bond can clean him out in the game, that Lashif will need asylum and will come to the British for that asylum in exchange for all he knows about the world's terrorist organisations. Whilst en route to the casino, in a really amusing and charming scene on a train, Bond meets this film's leading lady, Vesper Lynd, played absolutely sublimely by Eva Green. She is superb in this role, and you really do buy the chemistry between them. Sometimes when Bond and leading lady share the screen together, you can tell that she's only there really for, you know, the eye candy sort of thing. But with this, Vesper is a well-rounded character. The chemistry is superb between her and Daniel Craig's James Bond, and you really care about the character's development. But they have a really lovely scene on the train. They share dinner, and they sort of play a little bit of a game with each other, if you like, where they sort of try and analyse who each other is, and sort of, you know, well, I guess you're an orphan by the way that you did that, and you'd have gone to school here, and you're this sort of, and basically, let's say, analyse each other, and it's a really sort of playful scene, and the two do it wonderfully. When they arrive in Montenegro, they meet up with René Mathis and they establish their cover identities. And Mathis gives them a bit of background information as to what Le Chiffre's been up to and what the political state of affairs is in Montenegro at this moment in time. Bond is extremely arrogant in this part of the movie. Upon their arrival to the casino, Bond checks in saying, well, the reservation's under Beach, but you'll find that my name's James Bond. Vesper's mortified by this, believing that Bond's just given away their cover. And Bond then sort of gives a really sort of smug response, saying, well, all he gets in return is a name that he's already got, and it tells me something about him, that he's desperate to play this game and doesn't matter who he's playing because he needs to win. And really, Vesper makes a sort of a really good point that actually it shows that Bond's really impulsive and arrogant, and it doesn't actually set him in a good light. And it's a brilliant scene because it reminds us that this isn't the James Bond that we know and we love from the 20 previous adventures gone by. He is still learning his craft, he's going to make mistakes, and it's all about becoming that character that we know and love. Later in the evening, the game starts and Bond initially gets the upper hand by realising that he's learnt what Le Chiffre's tell is. In an interval of the game, Le Chiffre is ambushed in his hotel room by Urbano, who's come to take a hand for the fact that Le Chiffre has lost all his money, but decides not to at the last minute. He even threatens to take Le Chiffre's girlfriend's arm, but again decides not to, giving him the chance to play and try and win the money back. This obviously undoubtedly rattles Le Chiffre. Upon leaving Le Chiffre's room, Urbano and his bodyguard spot Bond and Vesper, and a fight then ensues. A fantastic fight in a stairwell that's really gritty and really violent, and is not something that we've seen in a James Bond film for a long time, possibly not even since the Connery days, with the Red Grant style fighting from Russia with Love. And it's a really, really brilliant scene, and Daniel Craig handles it superbly. The fight traumatises Vesper, and Bond finds her in their hotel suite crying in the shower, believing that she's covered in blood. In a really sombre and sweet moment, Bond sits and comforts Vesper. Later on in the poker game, Le Chiffre has actually been tipped off that Bond is aware of his tell. Le Chiffre uses this to his advantage, causing Bond to lose his winning streak in the game. Vesper refuses to buy Bond back in, which leaves Bond to snap. He grabs a knife off a table and goes after Le Chiffre with the intent of killing him. It's at this point that another ally introduces himself, Felix Leiter, played fantastically by Jeffrey Wright. Leiter agrees to stake Bond back in the game on the understanding that once the game is over that the CIA are able to bring Le Chiffre in. Bond of course agrees and returns to the game. During the next round of the game, Le Chiffre's girlfriend poisons one of Bond's drinks. Bond frantically races to his Aston Martin to get a medical kit with an antidote in it. He unfortunately passes out before he can administer the antidote and set the defibrillator going to make sure that he keeps his heart going, but Vesper at the last minute comes to his rescue and manages to revive Bond. It plays off then with a really sort of funny line, and Daniel Craig does really well at delivering the very few subtle comedic one-liners that are in this. You know, he says, that last hand almost killed me, and basically lets Le Chiffre know that he knows full well what's going on. Bond then manages to win the game with a straight flush. Le Chiffre is absolutely infuriated and leaves. Bond and Vesper then share a dinner together, where Vesper is then called away by Mathis. But in actual fact, Vesper has been kidnapped by Le Chiffre. Bond, realising this, gives chase in his Aston Martin and nearly runs Vesper over in the road, crashing the car and actually earning himself a Guinness World Record along the way for the most car flips done in a movie to that point. Le Chiffre then captures Bond as well and takes him hostage, and in a really gruesome torture scene, Le Chiffre interrogates Bond, asking him for the account number and the password to the winnings. Bond, of course, refuses and plays this scene absolutely perfectly. Daniel Craig is superb in this scene. He balances the fear at the start of the scene that he doesn't know what's going on, and you can really see the like, oh shit, what's going on here sort of thing, to then when he finally regains control of the scene and sort of ultimately almost accepts his fate and the fact that he's probably going to die in that room, strapped naked to a chair, and he sort of owns the moment really. And the joke, the world's going to know that you died scratching my ball, is really quite a powerful scene when you sort of take it all into context, sort of thing. Yeah, it gives the audience a bit of a laugh, but it's like, actually, no, this guy is becoming Bond. He's not going to let the mission fail. But before anything else can happen, Mr. White bursts in and kills Le Chiffre. Bond is then left unconscious from his injuries and wakes up recovering in an MI6 hospital. It's at that point that he has Mathis arrested, as Le Chiffre had revealed that Mathis was actually a double agent. Bond spends time recovering with Vesper and ultimately decides, after the pair fall in love, that he is going to retire from the Secret Service and that they're going to sail around the world together before settling down to have a life together. The pair end up in Venice, where Vesper says she needs to go to a bank to make sure that they have some money for supplies. It's at that point that Bond receives a phone call from M asking if he's ever going to deposit the winnings from the poker game back to the Treasury. Bond, under the assumption that he'd done this with Vesper earlier on, realises that he's been double-crossed and that actually Vesper is the double agent. Bond traces Vesper to the drop-off point, where she's immediately taken captive by the gunmen sent to retrieve the money when they spot Bond. The final climactic battle of this film ensues, with Bond shooting out the inflation devices that are keeping the building stable so that the building begins to sink into the Venice canals. Bond expertly and brutally takes out the various gunmen using his gun and DIY tools as well. Vesper is trapped in a lift that is now submerged underwater. She locks herself in so that Bond's unable to free her, as she is upset and mortified with the actions that she's taken, and chooses ultimately to drown herself. Bond manages to get her out of the elevator, but it's too late to revive her, and he's visibly heartbroken. Mr. White looks on at Bond trying to resuscitate Vesper as he escapes with the money. In a later scene, M reveals that Vesper's boyfriend had been captured and tortured by Le Chiffre's organisation, and that they would only release him if she agreed to become a double agent for the poker game. When Bond coldly states the line from the Fleming novel, "The bitch is dead," M reminds him that Vesper likely made the deal to save Bond's life that night where Le Chiffre was torturing him, knowing full well that she was going to her death, and that she likely did love him, as she'd left her mobile phone behind with clues pointing onwards to Mr. White. In the final scene of the film, we see Mr. White arriving at a lakeside villa in Italy. He receives a phone call. Before he can say anything on the phone call, he's shot in the leg. As he's desperately trying to crawl to safety, Bond emerges carrying the assault rifle and introduces himself. And this is the first time in the film that Bond's used the classic, "The name's Bond, James Bond." At that point, the fanfare comes up, the credits roll, James Bond will return, and we have been thoroughly introduced to a new James Bond. Now, I've mentioned a few times throughout this review, I absolutely adore this film. This film is my second favourite Bond film of all time, second only to Licence to Kill. It was this film alongside Licence to Kill that really sort of inspired me to be the Bond fan that I am today. In the intervening period between Die Another Day and Casino Royale coming out was the period where I really started to get interested in James Bond. I worked my way through all my dad's Connery VHSs and the Brosnan ones that he taped off the TV. I saved up my pocket money that my parents and my grandparents had given me, and used to go to Blockbusters or go to the local charity stores, which are like thrift stores for anybody outside the UK, and pick up the titles second hand, and slowly but surely built my Bond collection and became a fan. By the time this film came out, me and Dad went to see it on opening night. And I was an absolute Bond super nerd. I just couldn't wait for Bond 22 the minute the credits rolled. The next day I was, we'd been to see it the night before, and the next day I was just sort of in awe of this film and just couldn't stop thinking about it and was desperate to go and see it again. And then when Dad got it on DVD, it was sort of like, yeah, we're going to watch this film again, and I was just super, super excited. And the run up to Quantum of Solace was the first time really that I'd sort of got caught in the hype of a new Bond film coming out, and I just absolutely love it. I think that Craig is superb, and I think that, largely across his whole tenure, he has been the one constant, that he has been superb as James Bond. The films around him might not have always been the best films, looking at you, Spectre, but Bond himself and the portrayal of Bond as played by Daniel Craig has been consistent and absolutely fantastic. That being said, this one is definitely his best performance. I don't think that he's matched this one in any of his films to date. Obviously, No Time to Die, I'll be able to tell you in a couple of weeks when I've seen it. I think the supporting cast, Mads Mikkelsen, Judi Dench, Eva Green, Jeffrey Wright, everybody else that's in the film are all absolutely superb. Everybody plays their parts fantastically, and it's just a cast to be reckoned with. I really like the way that they've updated the story of Casino Royale to make it fit in the more modern context, but the bits that need to be there from Fleming are there, and obviously makes it the most faithful adaptation of the material to date. And I don't think we're going to get any more adaptations of it, because I don't think Eon Productions would let it happen. I absolutely adore this film, folks. I thoroughly recommend checking it out if by some slim chance you haven't seen it. This is a film I come back to regularly with this series, and always have a great time with it whenever I do. If it's on the TV and I'm flicking through, I will stop what I'm doing and I'll watch it. It doesn't matter where it is in the film, if it's 5 minutes in or 5 minutes from the end or anything in between, I'm going to watch it. I would just like to make mention as well, before I rate the film, that Martin Campbell, the director, did an absolutely superb job, and this is actually the second time that he's reinvented Bond for a new audience after a breakaway. He actually reinvented 007 with 1995's GoldenEye and introduced the world to Pierce Brosnan, and did an absolutely superb job with that. And that was the reason that he was brought back for this film, is so that he could do the same thing again with Daniel Craig. The guy's hit 2 home runs and it's absolutely superb. I think now that all that's left for me to do is to rate this film, and I would give this film a solid 9 out of 10. So there we are, folks. That has been my thoughts, my review, my ramblings, if you will, on 2006's Casino Royale, one of my all-time favourite James Bond films, my second in the rankings. What's your thoughts on this film? What's your thoughts on Daniel Craig? Let me know down below in the comments. As always, I love to have a chat with you guys about these films. They are my biggest passion, and I really do appreciate the support that you've shown me throughout this series, of course, as well as on the channel as a whole. But let me know down below your thoughts on this film. Let's have a natter about it. If you haven't liked the video, please drop it a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel already, please think about doing so. I'd love to have you stick around a little bit longer. Of course, it helps the channel to grow, and I'd love to see you again for future videos. Above all else, folks, take care of yourselves, and I look forward to seeing you really, really soon when we take a look at 2008 Quantum of Solace.